Sometimes, the people who toss you aside think they're getting rid of nothing, until they realize they've lost everything. Pain doesn't just break you, it builds the version of you they'll never be prepared to face. Blake Dawson threw out his struggling pregnant wife, completely unaware she was the hidden heiress to a fortune that could rewrite destinies. Now she's back, not for mercy but for justice. Elena Carter once believed her marriage was a fairy tale. She was expecting their child, emotionally raw and clinging to promises of forever. Then came one stormy night that shattered it all. Blake shoved her out into the cold, heartless San Francisco rain, closing the door on the life they'd built. What he didn't know was that the quiet woman he had dismissed as useless was in truth the only daughter of a billion-dollar empire. Her heart may have been in pieces, but she still had a future, one she would now reclaim. To everyone around her, Elena Carter was just another ordinary woman. She lived in a small walk-up apartment in downtown San Francisco, worked part-time at an indie bookstore, and took community college night classes. Soft-spoken and humble, Elena was easy to overlook, including by her husband, Blake. He never suspected that she came from anything but modest beginnings. He certainly never imagined she was the sole heir to a family dynasty, one that operated silently behind the scenes of global commerce. The Carter family empire stretched across continents, luxury hotels, tech startups, real estate conglomerates, and her father, Gregory Carter, had once been at the center of it all. But his obsession with power and legacy had driven a wedge between him and Elena's mother, Eleanor, years ago. Eleanor had chosen peace over opulence and raised Elena far away from the noise of high society. Their life had been quiet, private, and grounded. While Gregory expanded his reach from Manhattan to Macau, Eleanor kept Elena rooted in books, kindness, and a sense of self-worth that money could never buy. When Eleanor passed 3 years ago, Elena was devastated. The inheritance she received was staggering. But out of loyalty to her mother's values, she told no one, not even Blake. She craved an ordinary life. And for a brief, fragile moment, she thought she had it. Until she met Blake Dawson. Blake worked in corporate sales at a mid-tier car dealership in downtown San Francisco. His charm was undeniable, tall, smooth-talking, with a smile that could disarm even the most cautious. He had that magnetic quality that pulled people in, speaking with the confidence of a man who didn't just sell cars, he sold illusions. When Elena Carter walked into the dealership to buy a used car, something she could have purchased in cash without a second thought, she kept her financial reality hidden, just like always. Blake was immediately drawn to her quiet beauty. To him, she was different. Unpretentious, mysterious, not spoiled by money or status. He was intrigued. They started dating, and within 6 months their whirlwind romance swept them into a quick courthouse wedding. For a fleeting moment, Elena felt like she had everything she ever wanted. She believed Blake loved her for who she truly was, not for what she might one day inherit. She laughed at his stories, admired his ambition, and felt safe in his embrace. She let herself fall more deeply than she ever had before, convinced she had finally found someone who saw her, not her last name. When Elena found out she was pregnant, Blake seemed overjoyed. He promised to step up, to be the kind of father who was present, who worked hard, who protected his family. His paycheck wasn't impressive, but he talked a big game about promotions, bonuses, corporate dreams, and a future filled with vacations, private schools, and a bigger home. Promises wrapped in charisma, but hollow beneath. Elena admired his drive. She never once considered revealing the truth about her wealth. She wanted their love to be built on something real. But the fantasy began to fray. At first it was subtle, sarcastic comments about her not contributing enough financially. Then came the pressure to pick up extra shifts at the bookstore, complaints about the rent, and passive-aggressive remarks about the cost of prenatal vitamins or the occasional cafe treat. Meanwhile, Blake was treating himself to custom suits, steakhouse dinners with colleagues, and weekend getaways labeled as networking events. The receipts told stories he never explained, and yet he nitpicked every dollar she spent. Worse, he began pulling away, not just emotionally, but physically. Coming home late, barely speaking, brushing off her questions with a cold smirk. Their small one-bedroom apartment felt smaller with every passing day. As her belly grew, so did the distance between them. Still, Elena held on. She told herself it would get better, that once the baby came, everything would change. She swallowed her nausea, hid her fatigue, and buried her fears under forced optimism. But the man she once saw as a partner was becoming a stranger. The breaking point came on a stormy night, 6 months into her pregnancy. Rain pounded against the windows, thunder cracked overhead, and lightning lit up the walls like a warning. Blake stumbled in late, drunk, and reeking of perfume that wasn't hers. Elena's heart sank as the scent of another woman clung to him like betrayal made flesh. His tie was crooked, his hair, usually styled to perfection, was disheveled. The man she had married wasn't just distant now, he was disappearing. "What happened to you?" Elena asked, her voice low, her hand instinctively resting on her swollen belly. She stepped toward him gently, reaching out to take Blake's soaked jacket. "Don't touch me," Blake snapped, yanking his arm away like her fingers had burned him. "You think being pregnant makes you special? Like I owe you something now?" "Blake, I don't understand," she said, tears beginning to pool in her eyes. "You said you had a client meeting. You reek of—" "Don't start, Elena," he cut in, his words slurred, jabbing a finger toward her face. "I'm not in the mood for your whining. You know how humiliating it is being married to someone who can't even hold down a basic job? Do you know what that makes me look like to my team?" She took in a shaky breath. "Blake, we're supposed to be a team. I'm trying. We're gonna have a baby. I'm saving. I'm supporting you." "Saving what?" he barked, letting out a humorless laugh, swaying as he stepped closer. "We're broke, and now you're having a baby? Great. Just another mouth to feed." Elena had never seen him like this, so venomous, so brimming with contempt. His words sliced through her, each one sharper than the last. "Blake," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks, "you told me you wanted this. You said you were excited." "Yeah, well, maybe I changed my mind," he scoffed. "What have you actually done for me, huh? I'm stuck in this shoebox apartment, paying all the bills, and you've never brought anything real to the table." "That's not fair," she said, summoning a strength she didn't know she had. "I never asked for more. I've paid my share. I've never needed—" But she didn't get to finish. Blake suddenly stormed across the room. He grabbed her suitcase from the corner, yanked the closet doors open, and began throwing her clothes inside. Elena stood frozen, horror and confusion swirling inside her like a whirlpool. "Blake, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I'm done," he said coldly. "Get out of my life. I can't stand to look at you anymore." "Please," she begged, her voice trembling. "I'm pregnant. We need to talk. We need to—" He zipped the suitcase shut with violent precision, slammed it on the hardwood floor, and pointed toward the door like she was nothing more than an unwanted guest. "Grab your things and leave. I've got enough crap in my life. I don't need some whiny hormonal woman making it worse." Elena's head spun. Her heart pounded like it was trying to escape her chest. She felt like she had just stepped into someone else's nightmare, but it was hers. And it was only the beginning. Elena made one last attempt to reason with him, but Blake wouldn't budge. Instead, he shoved her roughly toward the front door, ignoring the pain in her eyes, the way she clutched her belly in fear. Her breath caught, disbelief tightening her chest as she tried to plead one final time. But his gaze was ice, cold, hollow, and void of anything human. In a desperate effort to protect her unborn child, Elena wrapped both arms around her belly as she stumbled out into the violent downpour. The door slammed behind her with thunderous finality. A heartbeat later, her suitcase came flying after her, landing hard on the slick pavement. The zipper split open on impact, sending a pair of baby booties and a half-read parenting book spilling into the street. She stood there, drenched, shaking, tears lost in the sheets of rain. The middle of the night in San Francisco never felt colder. Lightning sliced the sky in jagged streaks, illuminating the surreal moment like flashes from a horror film. She had nowhere to go, no one to call, nothing to lean on, except the life she'd tried so hard to bury for the sake of normalcy. Thunder rumbled like a warning as she picked up her suitcase with trembling hands, the other protectively shielding her stomach. The grief was overwhelming. But beneath it, something else stirred. Rage. And beneath that, resolve. This wouldn't be the end of her story. She had done everything right. She'd been quiet, supportive, loving, and Blake had thrown all of that away without hesitation. He had no idea who she really was. He didn't know the power she carried in her name, the power she could unleash with a single phone call. He thought her kindness made her weak. But weakness didn't come from compassion, it came from cruelty. And his cruelty would cost him everything. But for now, Elena didn't care about revenge. She just had to survive the night. With one last glance at the building that once held her dreams, she turned and walked into the storm. Each raindrop hit like punctuation on the end of her old life. Each step was a tear away from the woman she used to be, the soft one, the quiet one. One day, Blake would realize what he had done. And when that day came, she'd be ready, holding the card he never saw coming. She found temporary refuge in a roadside motel just outside the city, paid in cash, thankful she had stashed away an emergency fund long ago. Her pregnancy had begun to show, but strangers still looked at her with curious eyes. Was she really about to become a mother? She avoided eye contact with the receptionist. She didn't need pity. She needed a plan. In the stillness of the motel room, her new reality settled like a weight on her chest. She was alone, pregnant, heartbroken, but not helpless, and definitely not broke. At dawn, she picked up her phone and dialed a number she had rarely used, reserved for moments like this. It went to voicemail. Minutes later, her phone buzzed. "Elena, my dear, is that you?" That familiar voice, warm yet worn, brought her to tears. Harold Easton, her mother's lifelong attorney, her family's most trusted confidant, one of the very few who knew who Elena Carter really was. "Mr. Easton," she whispered, her voice cracking, "I need your help." He didn't hesitate. An hour later, he was standing in the doorway of her motel room, dressed in a crisp navy suit, his silver hair catching the morning light like a quiet halo. Despite the early hour, Harold gave Elena a long, somber once-over, the concern etched deep into the fine lines of his aging face. "My dear," he said gently, "I'd heard whispers that you'd married quietly. I hoped it brought you peace. But I can see now that it didn't." Elena shook her head, fresh tears threatening to spill over again. "He threw me out, Mr. Easton," she said, her voice trembling. "He doesn't even know who I really am. I never told him about my family, or the inheritance." Harold listened in silence, nodding slowly as her words sank in. He had known Elena since she was a child and had promised her mother, Eleanor, to keep the Carter legacy hidden until Elena herself was ready to bear its weight. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice thick with empathy. "What do you want to do now?" Elena hesitated. Her body felt like stone, exhausted from the emotional wreckage, her eyes raw from hours of crying. But she had to think of her baby. She had to do something. "I need a place to stay," she said finally. "And I think I'm ready. Ready to step into the life my mother left behind. I'm done hiding." Harold gave a solemn nod, like he'd been waiting to hear those words for years. "It's your legacy," he said softly. "Your mother wanted you to have the freedom to choose your own way. She never wanted the money to define you, nor did she want you buried beneath its shadow. But now, you've seen what the world is like without it. And maybe it's time to stand in the light." Elena swallowed hard, those words settling into her like the roots of something long overdue. She had spent so much of her life rejecting wealth, rejecting power, anything that reminded her of her distant, domineering father. All she'd wanted was something real. But reality had pushed her to a crossroads. "Yes," she said, her voice no longer shaking. "I'm ready." By that afternoon, Harold had arranged for her to be moved discreetly into a penthouse in downtown San Francisco. The property had once belonged to Eleanor Carter, but had been untouched for years. It towered high above the city in a sleek high-rise, complete with panoramic windows, white marble floors, and sharp, modern design. It was beautiful, lavish, almost overwhelming. As Elena stepped into the vast living room, her breath caught in her throat. The skyline stretched out before her like something from a dream. "It's too much," she whispered. Harold stepped beside her, calm and steady. "You own this place, Elena. It can be as simple or as grand as you want it to be. But more than that, it's a safe place. And you deserve that now, especially with the baby coming." Her hand instinctively moved to her belly. Tears welled up again, not out of pain, but relief. She had a roof. She had safety. She had a future. "Thank you, Mr. Easton," she whispered. She murmured a quiet thank you, still dazed by the weight of it all. Harold handed her a set of keys. "I've already had the fridge stocked," he said gently. "If you'd like, I can arrange for a housekeeper. And remember, The Carter estate is vast. There are funds we can activate anytime you're ready. Elena nodded, the words echoing in her mind. Her mother used to say, money can solve practical problems, but never matters of the heart. And right now, her heart was in ruins. But at least her basic needs, food, shelter, safety, were no longer in question. For now, that was enough. In the days that followed, Elena tried to adjust to her new life. She started turning one of the penthouse's smaller rooms into a nursery. Neutral tones, soft textures. She didn't know if she was having a boy or girl yet, but she wanted the space to feel peaceful. Shopping for baby items at high-end boutiques in the Mission District felt surreal. She had access to anything she wanted, but that quiet humility her mother had instilled in her wouldn't let go. She wasn't used to spending freely, not on herself, not on symbols of privilege. One afternoon, while standing in a softly lit aisle lined with designer cribs and plush animal toys, she nearly broke down. The memory of Blake's betrayal pressed in like a weight on her chest. It felt too raw, too recent. Then, one morning, there was a knock at her door. Elena opened it to find a sharply dressed woman in a slate-gray blazer, a notepad in hand, and a photographer just behind her. "Elena Carter?" the woman asked, her voice smooth, professional. "Or should I say Miss Carter Lancaster? I'm Mallory Blake with the San Francisco Financial Tribune. Sorry to drop in unannounced, but we've been trying to get in touch regarding your father's latest acquisition." Her heart dropped. Mallory Blake, a reporter, and someone who clearly had connections to her father, Gregory Carter. "We've also heard rumors," the reporter continued with a too pleasant smile, "that you may be stepping into a leadership role within the Carter family's business network. Any truth to that?" Elena's stomach twisted. "I'm not giving interviews," she said firmly, keeping her tone civil as she shut the door without another word. The barrage of questions continued through the closed door, muffled and irrelevant. She leaned her back against the wood, trying to breathe. Her father's empire had always existed on the edges of her life, massive, untouchable, and never her concern. But now, it was circling closer. The idea of seeing Gregory Carter again, of getting pulled into his world, made her pulse race. Still, she knew she couldn't run from it forever. That evening, with the city lights twinkling beyond the glass windows, Elena sat down and faced it head-on. Elena sat across from Harold in the plush living room of the penthouse, the golden San Francisco sunlight filtering in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She took a small sip of her decaf tea, gently cradling her belly with one hand, the weight of motherhood already grounding her. "What about my father?" she asked softly. Harold sighed, setting down his teacup with practiced care. I've kept him updated on your well-being. It was your mother's request before she passed. Gregory's known for some time now that you've taken residence here. Whether he decides to reach out, that's out of my hands." Elena closed her eyes, and for a moment, the memory of the man she once called Dad flickered through her mind like an old photograph. Gregory Carter, larger than life, impeccably dressed, always arriving with extravagant gifts and empty praise. He had made rare appearances during her childhood, then vanished just as easily. She had never believed he truly cared. Everything he did seemed designed for appearances. Eventually, Eleanor had cut him out entirely, raising Elena in peace, far from the suffocating orbit of his power. Now, fate seemed to be dragging him back into her life. In the weeks that followed, the signs came slowly at first, calls from unknown numbers, then elegant envelopes slid beneath the penthouse door. Invitations to Carter family events she never even knew existed. The San Francisco elite began to whisper. Elena Carter, the lost daughter of Gregory Carter, had returned, pregnant, powerful, poised for influence. But Elena didn't care for cocktail parties or press exposure. Her focus was on her child, on finding peace after so much chaos. Still, thoughts of Blake crept in during the quiet moments. Late at night, like shadows under the bedroom door, he had discarded her, called her useless. He had no idea what she'd sacrificed for him, how she'd hidden her legacy just so he wouldn't feel small. And now, here she was, in a penthouse he wouldn't even be allowed to valet at. If only he knew. Elena filled her days with parenting books, calming prenatal routines, and long, quiet talks with Harold about the future. Then, one rainy afternoon, as droplets tapped against the glass like a lullaby, Harold cleared his throat. "There's one more matter we need to address." he said gently. Your mother's will. Now that you're residing in one of her properties, it's time to take the next steps. Elena nodded slowly, heart fluttering with a mix of nerves and anticipation. Okay, I'm ready. Harold leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. Before she passed, Eleanor arranged a trust. It becomes active upon the birth of your first child. The baby will inherit a significant share of the Carter estate, enough to secure their future for generations. He paused, then added, You'll be the legal guardian and trustee. No one, not even your father, can interfere. It's all been sealed. Your father can't contest it, Harold said firmly, not without triggering serious legal consequences. Elena felt a tightening in her chest. The weight of it, the permanence, the protection, settled over her like armor. She hadn't fully grasped just how deeply her mother had planned for this moment. So, it's all locked in? She asked quietly. Harold gave her a reassuring smile. Yes, no one can take it away. Not from you, and certainly not from your child. You're both protected. Protected. The word didn't just echo, it anchored her. It wrapped around the broken pieces of her past like a shield. She had power now. Not just money. Power rooted in security, in foresight, in legacy. She was no longer the woman who once begged Blake not to walk out. That woman, the one left crying in the rain, was gone. In her place stood someone new. A mother. Steady, unshakable, ready to defend her child with every ounce of strength she'd buried for years. Blake Dawson would never make her feel small again. He thought she was helpless. He never looked deep enough to see what was waiting behind her silence. As the weeks turned into months, Elena grounded herself in her new life. She prepared for the baby's arrival with quiet purpose, transforming the penthouse into something warm, soft, and welcoming. Classical music floated through the air. Baby monitors beeped softly. Delivery boxes labeled organic cotton, non-toxic, and ultra-premium stacked up neatly in corners. Sometimes in the quiet moments she thought about Blake. Maybe he was still holed up in that cramped apartment, clinging to his ego, blaming her for the mess he created. Or maybe he'd moved on, latched onto someone flashier, wealthier, someone he could use without being found out. The irony burned. He had no idea that the woman he discarded was worth more than he'd ever dreamed of. And even less of a clue that the child he turned his back on would inherit a fortune that could reshape legacies. Elena tried not to think about revenge. Her baby came first now. But still, late at night, when the city slept and silence filled the spaces between her thoughts, she sometimes pictured it. Blake showing up one day, full of regret, begging her to take him back. And she, standing tall. Not broken, not bitter, just done. Maybe I won't be so quick to forgive, she would think. As her 7th month arrived, so did the discomfort. Backaches, sleepless nights, swollen feet. But something else had come to, purpose. She began exploring ways to use her wealth meaningfully, recalling her mother's quiet belief that privilege should serve others. One idea stuck with her, creating a library and resource center for young mothers. A space where women like her, women left behind, could find support, care, and strength. It felt right, like she was finishing something Eleanor had started. Harold supported her, though he offered a gentle reminder. You have time, Elena. Focus on your health first. Let the rest fall into place. Then, one crisp San Francisco morning, the intercom buzzed. Elena stirred from a restless sleep, heart skipping. Someone was downstairs, unannounced. Was it Blake? Or, worse, her father? She padded over to the monitor, every nerve on edge. Elena pressed the intercom button, her voice cautious. Yes, it's Natalie Green, Miss Carter, the doorman responded politely. She says she's an old friend. Elena's face immediately softened. Natalie Green, of course. One of the rare people who knew parts of Elena's tangled past. They'd spent summers during high school volunteering at a neighborhood literacy program. Natalie also knew the truth about Elena's identity, but had never once betrayed her confidence. Send her up, please. Moments later, Natalie stepped through the penthouse doors, her eyes widening as she took in the luxurious sunlit space. Whoa, Elena, she said with a low whistle, scanning the high ceilings and modern decor. You weren't exaggerating about the whole Carter family empire thing. Elena chuckled, waddling over to embrace her friend. Trust me, if it weren't for, well, everything, I'd still be holed up in that shoebox apartment. She guided Natalie into the living room. The two sank into a plush ivory sofa as Natalie placed a small bakery bag on the coffee table. Brought pastries. Figured you might be in the mood for something sweet. Elena poured tea into matching porcelain cups. Better, she admitted, patting her baby bump gently. I feel settled, but yeah, still not over Blake. Natalie's smile faded, her eyes narrowing with remembered anger. She had been furious when she first heard what Blake had done. Have you heard from him at all? She asked quietly. Not a single word, Elena replied, keeping her voice even, though the sting of that silence hadn't dulled. Some part of her still wished he'd call, that he'd say he regretted everything, that he'd apologize. Another part of her dreaded what it might do to her healing. Natalie reached out and gently squeezed her arm. You deserve so much more. And for what it's worth, I'm here, okay? For anything. The baby, errands, middle of the night venting, you name it. Elena smiled through misty eyes, the warmth of friendship pulling her back from the edge. Thank you, actually, there is something. She drew in a steadying breath. I've been thinking about starting a foundation, a resource center for young moms, a space for support, prenatal care, counseling, job training, a place where they won't feel alone. Natalie's eyes lit up with instant enthusiasm. That's incredible. I'm in. Let's build something amazing. After Natalie left, Elena felt a spark of purpose. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't just surviving, she was moving forward. She already had a prenatal appointment lined up next week, and she planned to use the outing to begin scouting locations for the center. But the very next morning, her new sense of peace was shattered. There was a knock at her penthouse door, and when she opened it, the face staring back at her was one she hadn't seen in years. Gregory Carter, her father. Elena froze in place, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. He stood tall in the doorway, posture straight as ever, his silver-streaked hair immaculately groomed. Everything about him exuded the sharp control of a man who'd spent a lifetime commanding boardrooms. The crisp lines of his tailored navy suit, the glint of a gold watch beneath his cuff. Gregory Carter was every inch the empire builder she remembered. Hello, Elena, he said, voice calm and measured. May I come in? She hesitated, but then stepped aside. Of course. Gregory entered the penthouse, his eyes scanning the space with quiet, calculated observation. I see you've made yourself comfortable, he noted. I have, Elena replied, folding her arms. Mr. Easton helped me get settled. Harold's a good man, Gregory said as he moved toward the expansive window. For a brief second his gaze flicked to her belly, and something softened, just barely, across his otherwise impenetrable features. You're carrying my grandchild. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach. A strange mix of protectiveness and unease flared up within her. Yes, she said quietly. I am. Gregory's shoulders dipped ever so slightly as he took a long, deep breath. I know I was never the father you needed, he said, slower now. Your mother and I, we had our differences. But I want to be here now. Whatever you need, I'm willing to help. Elena met his gaze, emotion rising in her throat. And what exactly do you think I need from you, father? He cleared his throat. Financial assistance for one, media protection, legal connections. I know you probably resent me, but I don't want you going through this alone. Her first instinct was to reject it all. She didn't need him. Not his money, not his name, not after all these years. But Harold's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her of her mother's hope, that maybe someday they might reconnect. And she couldn't ignore the reality. Being aligned with the Carter name again could shield her child, especially if Blake ever resurfaced and tried to stake a claim he didn't deserve. I appreciate the offer, she said at last. But let's make something clear. I'm not your project. I'm not your second chance at legacy. If you want to be a part of this baby's life, it's on my terms, mine and the child's. Gregory nodded. I understand. And for a moment, a flicker of something real crossed his face. Relief. Maybe even gratitude. They talked for nearly an hour, about her pregnancy, her health, the press whispers starting to circulate. Gregory offered to put her in touch with top OBGYNs to tighten her private security. Elena, still cautious, saw the benefit of accepting his help, for her child, if not for herself. In the weeks that followed, Gregory returned a few more times. Once, he took her to a boutique maternity store in the Marina district, quietly paying for a haul of newborn essentials despite her half-hearted protests. It felt surreal, walking beside the man she'd avoided for most of her adult life, now discussing bassinet sizes and sleep sacks. Part of her softened, just a little, when she saw the pride in his eyes, the way he looked at her, not as an obligation, but as a daughter. Still, she didn't let herself forget. This was the same man who had missed every birthday, every school play, every moment that mattered. Birthdays came and went without a call. But still, Elena allowed for the faint possibility that people could change, or at the very least, try. Meanwhile, Blake remained conspicuously silent. Through mutual acquaintances, Elena heard whispers that he was dating someone new, that he'd been bragging about how he'd finally ditched his dead weight. The words cut deep, but they also hardened her resolve. Blake Dawson belonged to the past, and if he ever dared to creep back into her life, he would meet a very different woman. One who didn't need him. One who never had. In the eye of that emotional storm, Elena took a powerful step forward. She agreed to get involved, at least on a trial basis, with Carter International Holdings. Gregory arranged a quiet, off-the-record meeting with a handful of trusted board members. Elena wanted to understand the infrastructure of what her child would one day inherit. She wanted to see how the company truly worked, and more importantly, what it could do beyond profit margins. The atmosphere in the boardroom was tense. Several of the older members gave her long, doubtful looks. One or two whispered remarks about her visible pregnancy. But Gregory silenced the room when he stood and introduced her unequivocally as his daughter, his heir in name and intent. Elena didn't try to dazzle. She asked real questions about sustainability, about ethical sourcing, about how much of their philanthropic wing was actually making a difference. She didn't need to prove herself, but she did. By the end of the session, she had caught the attention of one of the company's most respected veterans, James Caldwell. "You speak with the same integrity your mother did," he told her quietly as they walked out. Eleanor was the soul of this company's conscience. He gave her a nod. "It's good to have you here, Elena." Her throat tightened. "Thank you," she said softly. "I just hope I can carry forward what she started." And as she left that room, something shifted. She wasn't just a woman picking up the pieces of a broken heart. She was a mother, a leader, someone with vision and voice. Her child would be born into a legacy of strength, not just wealth. And Elena would ensure that Carter International wasn't just successful, it would become a force for good. She began outlining goals: funding scholarships, building affordable housing, expanding maternal health care programs, the kinds of causes her mother would have championed. Still, in the quiet hours, when the penthouse dimmed and silence crept in, Blake's betrayal lingered like a bruise on her spirit. She remembered how he laughed at her, how he pushed her into the cold. She was stronger now, every day stronger, but some scars don't fade. She tried to focus on the now, on the good. She had shelter, family, a future for her child that gleamed with possibility. She had more blessings than she could count. Yet a question lingered in Elena's mind like a distant thunderclap. Would Blake ever come looking for her? And if he did, would he come seeking her forgiveness or her fortune? That thought haunted her dreams. Night after night, she relived the moment he threw her into the storm. The cold hadn't just sunk into her bones, it had pierced her soul. But if he ever came back, he wouldn't find the same woman standing at that door. The one who had begged, who had hoped. That woman was gone. A storm was brewing again, but this time, Elena wasn't running. She would meet it head-on, armed not with anger, but with clarity, power, a will forged in heartbreak and honed through purpose. The next chapter of her life would not be a tragedy. It would be a story of resilience, redemption, and maybe, when the time was right, revenge. Weeks passed, then months. A new kind of peace settled over her life. But it wasn't the soft, sleepy kind. It was the stillness before a storm she had chosen. One she welcomed, and then it happened. Elena went into labor on a snowy San Francisco evening. Frost glazed the windows of the penthouse like delicate lace. She had just finished reviewing the final plans for the Mother's Resource Center she was building, when a sudden, sharp pain struck low in her abdomen. A contraction. The first signal that everything was about to change. Not just her life, but the future she was carrying into the world. Gregory Carter had insisted on arranging everything: a private car, a full security detail. Natalie Green, now Alina's steadfast companion and self-declared doula, rushed to her side the moment she got the call. Harold Easton was also there, orchestrating every logistical detail, every document, every clearance. Every form now bore the name Alina Carter, and with it came protection, legacy, and something she'd fought to reclaim: dignity. For a fleeting moment, a pang of sadness surfaced. No partner's hand to hold, no comforting smile to steady her. But she pushed the thought away. She had already grieved that absence. Blake's absence wouldn't define this moment. The vehicle that carried her to the hospital wasn't an ambulance. It was a black, high-end SUV, medically outfitted and gliding through the quiet, snow-dusted streets toward the city's premier maternity hospital. Alina focused on her breath, her fear mixed with adrenaline, her eyes blurred, not from pain, but from the gravity of it all. She had never felt more vulnerable or more powerful. She was about to bring new life into the world. The labor was long, exhausting, 12 grueling hours. Her father paced the corridors like a restless lion, refusing to leave, even when gently urged by hospital staff. It was the first time Alina saw him shaken, not by market crashes or hostile takeovers, but by something real. Human. Natalie stayed by her side through every contraction, wiping sweat from her brow, whispering fiercely, "You're almost there. You're stronger than you think." And Alina believed her. Harold stood nearby, a constant, calming presence, shielding her from intrusions, steady as ever. Then, after one final primal push, a cry rang through the room. "It's a boy," the doctor said, his voice breaking the tension like sunlight through clouds. Alina collapsed back against the pillow, tears spilling down her cheeks. And then, she heard it, that tiny, powerful cry. They placed him in her arms, warm, fragile, infinite. Her son, her legacy. He was red-faced from the effort of his first breaths, weighing just 6 pounds, 7 ounces, small but perfect in every way. In that moment, nothing else mattered. The entire world faded into silence, and all Alina could feel was the tiny, miraculous weight of the life in her arms. The love that washed over her was unlike anything she had ever known. She pressed a trembling kiss to his forehead, her tears of joy soaking into his soft, downy cheek. Outside, the sun had begun to rise over San Francisco, casting golden streaks across the skyline like a promise. A new day, a new beginning. The next few hours passed in a blur. Nurses, doctors, forms, and IVs. Gregory eventually stepped into the room, slower than usual, more cautious. His famously sharp expression was dulled by something Alina rarely saw in him: gentleness. "He's beautiful," he murmured, reaching out with a slightly unsteady hand to touch the baby's tiny head. Alina gave him a weary smile, her face damp with sweat and tears. "He needs a name," she said hoarsely. She had thought about it, her mother's name. Something symbolic, something that meant new beginnings. Natalie had suggested it earlier, teasing softly, "What about James? After James Caldwell? Your mom always adored him." Alina considered it, then shook her head. "James is beautiful, but it doesn't feel quite right." Harold, quiet in the corner, finally spoke. "Your mother always loved the name Theodore," he offered. "She used to say it meant gift of God." The name stopped Alina. The room fell into a hush as something clicked deep within her. "Theodore," she whispered, then smiled. "Teddy," she looked down at her son, his little face already calmer, nestled close to her chest. "Yes, Theodore Sullivan Carter." Gregory nodded slowly, satisfied with the name, though Alina could see the flicker of surprise at the middle name, Sullivan. She met his eyes, knowing the question he didn't ask. "Sullivan was part of me when Teddy was conceived," she said quietly. "I want him to know where he came from. All of it. Not just the legacy, but the truth." It was a bittersweet choice. But Alina knew it was the right one. She wouldn't erase her past. As painful as it had been, it had led her here. Teddy was born of heartbreak, but he was also her hope, her future. The next week passed quietly, cocooned in a private maternity suite, bonding, healing, loving. News of Gregory Carter's new grandson spread like wildfire, but his private security kept the press at bay. Alina declined every interview. She wasn't a story. Teddy wasn't a headline. Not now, not ever. Finally, the day came to bring him home. She swaddled him in a soft, cream-colored blanket and carried him through the penthouse doors, now transformed into a space humming with life. Nursing stations, bassinets, smart monitors, every modern convenience Gregory could think to provide. A rotation of nurses had been arranged. A night nanny, pre-vetted and on call. Elena was grateful and overwhelmed. She appreciated the help, but sometimes she missed the simplicity of her old life. Before the wealth, before the legacy, before every decision felt filtered through the lens of power and expectation. Late one night, with Teddy sleeping peacefully in his bassinet and the lights of San Francisco twinkling beyond the glass, the intercom buzzed. Elena frowned, glancing at the clock. 11 p.m. Who could possibly be visiting now? She pressed the button. Yes. Miss Carter, came the voice from the front desk. There's a gentleman here, says he knows you. His name is Blake Dawson. Her heart stopped. Blake. After all these months, he was here. Her mind flooded with questions. Was he here to apologize, to beg for forgiveness? Or had the whispers finally reached him, the truth about her name, her son, her life? She drew in a slow breath, grounding herself. Send him away, she said, her voice calm, controlled. Part of her wanted to confront him, to show him what she'd built without him, to let him see the life he'd thrown away. But another part, the mother in her, refused to let chaos near her son. Teddy was upstairs, asleep in peace, and nothing would disturb that. There was a pause. He's causing a bit of a scene, the security officer said. Mr. Dawson says he won't leave unless he speaks with you. Elena's eyes closed. She saw it again, him shoving her into the storm, suitcase crashing onto the pavement, the freezing rain, the fear, the betrayal, and then the fire. She was not that woman anymore. Fine, she said at last. Send him to the lobby lounge. I'll come down. Adrenaline rushed through her as she gave quick instructions to the night nanny to stay with Teddy. She grabbed a tailored navy wool coat from the closet, simple, elegant, with fur trimming the collar, and stepped into the private elevator. You are in control now. If he tried anything, security was already standing by. As the elevator doors slid open onto the dim, ambient-lit lounge, she saw him. Blake was pacing by the marble fireplace, his suit wrinkled, his appearance tired and worn. His hair was longer, his face hollowed by stress. Gone was the polished charmer. In his place stood a man unraveling. When he saw her, he froze. Elena, he breathed. You look different. She walked across the lounge, heels clicking against polished stone, unhurried and poised. What do you want, Blake? He ran a hand through his hair, agitated. Can we talk? Somewhere more private? She didn't flinch, her arms folded, her stance steady. This is private enough. Say what you came to say. His eyes flicked around the room, at the fireplace, the subtle luxury, the distant doorman, the quiet hum of surveillance. He was in her world now, and it was nothing like the one he left her in. I've been hearing things, Blake said, his hands twitching at his sides. Okay? I heard you came into some money, and I heard you had the baby. The bluntness of his words landed like a slap, but Elena didn't flinch. Yes, she said evenly. I had the baby. A boy. Not that you ever asked or showed up, until now. Blake winced. I messed up, Elena. I was in a bad place. Work was hell. I was under pressure, and I acted like a jerk. I know that. I want to make it right. She raised a brow, arms still folded tightly across her chest. Why now? Her voice was calm, icy even, but her heart was pounding, not with fear, with fury. You threw me out in a storm, 6 months pregnant, she said, her words like knives. I begged you to talk to me. To just pause. And instead, you shoved me out like garbage. You told me I was worthless. And now what? You think I'm supposed to believe you've changed? Blake looked down, then around, eyes flicking nervously over the marble floors, the rich leather furniture, the soft glint of wealth everywhere. Things were chaotic back then, he muttered. I didn't know how to handle any of it. But I get it now. I was wrong. I want to be a father to our child. Elena's pulse raced, but not with hope. With rage. You don't even know your son's name, she said, her voice flat. He hesitated. No, I don't. You're right, but that's why I'm here. I want to try. Once those words might have cracked her, might have made her dream again. Not now. Not after the nights she spent alone, sick and terrified, while he partied. Not after the way he sneered at her growing belly. Not after he made her believe she was nothing. Was this really about change? Or was it about the penthouse? The Carter name? The headlines? It's too late, Blake, she said, steady and sharp. You abandoned me. You abandoned your son. We don't need you. His face twisted, desperation leaking through his worn-out composure. Please, Elena, just let me see him, once. I have a right. Her eyes turned to steel. Don't talk to me about rights. You gave those up the night you turned your back on us. She stepped forward, voice low, cutting like a blade. If you want to take this legal, go ahead, but be warned. My resources, they stretch further than you can begin to imagine. Blake's face went pale. He took a small step back. What are you saying? Elena's tone dropped, measured, dangerous. I'm saying you have no idea who you're dealing with. She took another step closer, her coat still perfectly draped over her shoulders. I'm a Carter, and my son is a Carter heir. If you try anything, I'll drown you in injunctions, filings, and federal court orders. You won't get within a block of us. He blinked, thrown off balance, his facade cracking. I thought maybe we could talk, try to find a way back. Maybe be a family again. A bitter smile flickered on her lips. Family? Images flashed in her mind, of crying alone, of the dark, of a suitcase on the sidewalk, of the man who watched her break and didn't blink. You're too late, Elena said, her voice low and level. I have a family now. My son, my friend Natalie, my father, and the legacy I'm building. She paused. Her voice remained calm, but beneath the surface, her pulse beat like war drums. You don't belong in that picture. Across the lounge, the doorman cleared his throat softly, sensing the tension. Blake glanced in his direction, then back at Elena, his expression twisting into something between rage and desperation. I'm not giving up, he muttered. His voice cracked with something he hoped sounded like resolve, but Elena saw it for what it was. A last grasp at control. Elena didn't blink. This conversation is over, she said coolly. If you have anything else to say, send it through my attorney. She turned and walked away without looking back. He called her name once, twice, but she didn't stop. Every step was a choice. Every inch of distance was a declaration. Her legs trembled, but her spine stayed straight. Adrenaline surged through her veins. Anger, yes. Relief, too, but above all, power. She had faced him, not cowered, not cried, not broken. She had risen. Back in the penthouse, Teddy slept peacefully, his soft breaths filling the room with quiet reassurance. Elena leaned over his bassinet, gently brushing the fine hair on his head. A single tear slipped down her cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from purpose. She would protect him. Fiercely. Fearlessly. Blake Dawson would never touch them again. But monsters rarely leave without leaving scars. What Elena didn't yet know was that Blake's desperation wouldn't fade. It would fester. It would push him toward something darker, more reckless. Something that could threaten everything she had rebuilt. In the weeks following his visit, Elena poured herself into motherhood and her mission. The Eleanor Carter Memorial Center, named in honor of her mother, was almost ready to open. It sat in a lovingly restored townhouse in one of San Francisco's most welcoming neighborhoods. With Natalie by her side, Elena oversaw every detail. Parenting workshops, mental health counseling, partnerships with local hospitals. Every shelf, every crib, every carefully placed pamphlet bore her imprint. This wasn't charity. It was reclamation. It was for the woman she used to be. Gregory remained a steady presence, still reserved, still wrapped in the habits of power. But he respected Elena's space, offering both financial backing and emotional support without overstepping. At the center's grand opening, he stood beside Elena and Natalie as they cut the ceremonial ribbon. Cameras flashed, local media took note. Gregory even gave a brief speech, praising Elena's vision, her drive. He said he was proud of her. The word caught her off guard. For just a second, something passed between them. Real. Unearned maybe, but honest. A flicker of the father-daughter bond she had always yearned for. It wasn't perfect, but maybe it didn't need to be. Yet even in the glow of triumph, Elena felt it, the whisper of unease. Blake. Since she denied him access to Teddy, she had noticed things. A figure lingering by the building's entrance, gone when she looked twice. Unknown numbers calling her cell, no voice when she answered. And a tightening in her gut, a warning she had learned never to ignore, told her this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And deep down, she knew. It was Blake. Elena knew it now, without a doubt. He was watching. Waiting. Circling like a predator, convinced that the woman he abandoned would still be the one he could break. But he was wrong. Inside the grand ballroom of the Fairmont, Elena moved with grace among a sea of CEOs, philanthropists, and public figures. Elegant conversations flowed around her, questions about the center, her mission, what came next. She answered each with measured poise, radiant beneath the shimmer of crystal chandeliers. A live orchestra played a soft waltz. Waitstaff glided by with champagne flutes balanced on silver trays. It was the kind of world she once avoided. Now she didn't just belong here, she owned it. Tonight wasn't just another gala, it was her debut. Her arrival, and then it happened. About an hour in, Elena noticed a disturbance near the entrance. A ripple of attention, a tightening of the air. She turned and saw him, Blake, pushing through the crowd, eyes wide with panic, desperation radiating from every frantic movement. Somehow he'd slipped past the event staff. Security began to close in, but Elena lifted her hand. She wanted this moment. Here, now. Their eyes met across the marble floor. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She stood tall, poised in a navy gown that caught the light like armor. Her power was quiet but undeniable. Blake looked like a man unraveling, his suit disheveled, his expression wild. Sweat clung to him like shame. Guests began to whisper. Cameras blinked. Phones rose discreetly into the air. So this is what it's about? Blake said bitterly, stopping just feet from her. Your grand revenge? Humiliate me in front of half of San Francisco? Elena's lips curved into a serene, cutting smile. No, Blake, she said, her voice clear and strong. I'm just living my life. You're the one who came crashing in. He laughed, cold, humorless. Living your life, surrounded by money and influence? All the things you hid from me? You never earned the right to know, she said, calm and piercing. I kept my wealth a secret because I wanted something real. A marriage built on love, not leverage. But clearly, that wasn't enough. Her voice didn't waver, but her eyes burned with the memory of rain and betrayal. Blake's cheeks flushed as cameras flashed again, capturing every word. You're unbelievable, he hissed. And then Elena turned to the crowd. This man, she said, projecting her voice across the ballroom, threw me into the street while I was 6 months pregnant, called me worthless, and now, because he sees what I've built, what I've become, he wants a place in it. The room fell silent. A hush rippled, like wind across water. Gregory stood near the edge of the crowd, his expression unreadable. Natalie stood frozen beside him, phone in hand, recording everything. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the power of the moment. Blake looked around, finally seeing it. This wasn't the woman he had thrown away. This was the empire he had underestimated. You're twisting it, he said weakly. I was under pressure. Things were falling apart. Elena stepped forward, her gaze steady and unblinking. You made your choice, she said. Now I've made mine. I'm protecting my son from the man who discarded him before he ever took his first breath. Her voice cracked, not from fragility, but from truth. Then she turned, snapped her fingers once. Security didn't hesitate. Blake had no place in this world anymore. And the message was crystal clear. Security stepped in without hesitation, escorting Blake away as his voice echoed across the polished marble of the ballroom floor. This isn't over, he barked. But no one listened. What once might have sounded like control now rang out like the final gasp of a man watching his last illusion crumble. His retreat was caught from every angle, media cameras tracking his every step, his humiliation sealed in digital permanence. Elena stood still, heart pounding beneath her gown, but her expression never wavered. Not a flicker of emotion betrayed her. She held the room, and she held herself. The world had just seen what she had become, not a victim, but a force. By the time the gala drew to a close, social media had ignited with clips of the confrontation. The headlines came fast. Lancaster heiress confronts estranged husband in ballroom standoff. Public opinion leaned hard in Elena's favor. Comments poured in. Praise, admiration, support. Backers of the Eleanor Carter Memorial Center tripled overnight. Even previous skeptics praised her poise and her courage in publicly calling out the man who had once reduced her to tears. They called her a symbol of strength, of resilience, of rebirth. And yet, as the crowd faded and the spotlight dimmed, something hollow remained in Elena's chest. Yes, the confrontation had brought a fierce satisfaction, but it didn't undo the nights she'd cried alone. It didn't unwrite the rain, the humiliation, the betrayal. Later that night, back in the quiet sanctuary of her penthouse, she fed Teddy his bedtime bottle and rocked him to sleep. As his eyes fluttered closed, tears slid silently down her cheeks. She leaned in, pressing her lips to his forehead. You'll never have to beg for love, she whispered. You'll never wonder if you're enough. I promise you that, my son. In the days that followed, Blake vanished from public view. Rumors swirled he had lost his job. Fired after the gala debacle made him too toxic for the company to handle. Tabloids claimed the woman he'd been dating had walked out, unwilling to attach herself to a man drowning in disgrace. One viral headline summed it up cruelly: "From deal closer to door slammer." Elena should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt empty. She had imagined a finish line, a final moment of justice. But all it left was silence. Maybe that's what revenge does, she thought. It burns everything, even the need for it. Still, life moved forward. Teddy's laughter filled the penthouse. His giggles echoed through a space that once felt cavernous. The resource center was thriving, serving dozens of women just like her, women who needed someone to believe in them. Gregory stayed close. Not intrusive, but present. They were rebuilding something, tentative, fragile, but real. And as Elena's work gained national attention, invitations followed: summits, panels, nonprofit conferences. She accepted them with quiet humility, always remembering who she was really doing it for. And then, the custody hearing. The press swarmed the courthouse steps, flashes bursting like fireworks as Elena stepped out of a sleek black SUV. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, her expression hidden behind dark sunglasses, but her posture said everything. She was ready. Inside, whispers filled the courtroom. Blake was already seated at the defendant's table. He looked thin, worn. His suit hung awkwardly on him. His attorney, a frazzled public defender, was already fumbling with paperwork. Across the aisle, Elena sat beside Harold Easton and her formidable legal team. She didn't look back, not once. Courtroom security stood tall as the judge entered, the bailiff calling the room to order. Testimonies began. Elena's legal team delivered a thorough, unshakable case. They presented documented texts, statements from witnesses, and video footage corroborating every claim she'd made. The heart of it all was that night, when Blake had thrown her out into a storm, 6 months pregnant and terrified. Several neighbors testified. They remembered the shouting, the slammed door, the suitcase on the sidewalk. They recalled Elena standing there, soaked and shaking, one arm wrapped around her belly. A caretaker from the Eleanor Carter Memorial Center also took the stand, testifying that Blake had attempted to smear the organization online, spreading false rumors about mismanagement and finances in a transparent effort to tarnish Elena's reputation. Blake's defense relied on emotional appeals. His public defender argued that Blake had been overwhelmed, under pressure, mentally unwell. That he regretted what happened. That Teddy deserved to have his father. That Elena was using her wealth and power to erase him from their son's life. He tried to portray her as vindictive, as calculated. But the facts painted a clearer picture. The judge listened with patience, his face unreadable as he weighed every detail. When the verdict came, it was firm. Due to Blake's unstable behavior, lack of consistent employment, and the tender age of the child, the court denied any request for unsupervised visitation. Instead, Blake was granted the possibility of supervised visitation, contingent on several conditions: proof of rehabilitation, ongoing therapy, employment, and consistent financial support for Teddy. Elena stepped out of the courthouse into a wall of flashing lights and murmuring reporters. She held Teddy close, head high, eyes forward. She had won. Not just the ruling, but something far deeper. Blake would never again get near her or her son without earning it, legally, emotionally, and consistently. And she doubted he had the discipline to try. Back at the penthouse, Gregory met her at the door with something rare, a genuine embrace. "Well done, Elena," he said simply. And in that moment, just for a breath, she let herself rest in the hug. She had come so far, from the trembling young woman cast out into the rain, to the mother who had just secured her child's future in front of a judge. Later that evening, after Teddy had been tucked in for a nap, Elena stood at the penthouse window. San Francisco sparkled beneath the stars. Her reflection shimmered in the glass. Older, wiser, harder maybe, but whole. She thought of the girl she used to be. How far she'd traveled, from heartbreak to purpose, from hiding to leading. She was shaping something bigger now, a growing foundation. Real policy change at Carter International, a life that mattered, not just for her, but for others. That night, Natalie stopped by with Thai takeout and chilled sparkling cider. They curled up on the couch, trading laughs and stories. To Elena Carter, Natalie said, raising her glass, the fiercest mother in the Bay Area. Alina smiled, heart full. "I'll take that title," she said. "Gladly." And in the weeks that followed, Blake never scheduled a single supervised visit. Eventually, word reached Elena that he had left San Francisco, moved to another city, maybe trying to start over. Maybe he had finally accepted defeat, or maybe he was cooking up something new. But if he was, she didn't lose sleep over it, because for the first time in a long time, Elena had peace. Her life was no longer haunted by chaos or apology. Her days were now filled with purpose, with laughter, and with the people who mattered most. Teddy, Gregory, Natalie, and the small circle of friends she trusted with her heart. The damage Blake had once done had been replaced with meaning, with stability, with the kind of quiet joy she never believed she'd find again. Her relationship with Gregory continued to evolve. The pain between them hadn't vanished, but it no longer owned them. They bonded over Teddy's firsts, his clumsy crawl, his babbling da-da-da, the way his tiny fingers wrapped around theirs with instinctual trust. Gregory even visited the Eleanor Carter Memorial Center regularly, donating supplies and mentoring young fathers who genuinely wanted to do better. Sometimes, Elena would see it, that flicker in his eyes when Teddy called him Pa. They never spoke about it. They didn't need to. She saw it, the healing, the growth. At Lancaster Global Holdings, board meetings were no longer cold battlegrounds. Elena's ideas, focused on ethical partnerships and community investment, began to gain traction. James Caldwell remained her steady ally, guiding and supporting her as they pushed the company to shift its old profit-driven legacy into one of social responsibility. The impact was tangible. Healthcare programs expanded, housing initiatives launched, funding was channeled into underserved neighborhoods across the Bay. But through it all, Elena stayed grounded. She never forgot what it had felt like to be powerless, to be soaked in rain and shame, begging for dignity. She never forgot the fear, the loneliness, and she made herself a promise. Never forget where you started. She gave quietly, wisely. No press tours, no photo ops, just real impact. One crisp fall morning, Elena walked hand in hand with Teddy to the playground behind the Eleanor Carter Memorial Center. The air smelled of leaves and sunshine. Children laughed, mothers chatted, coffee in hand, babies in slings. It wasn't just a center anymore. It was a community, a haven, rooted in kindness, in second chances, in strength. Elena's eyes caught on a young woman off to the side, nervous, alone, pushing a stroller like she wasn't sure she belonged. Without hesitation, Elena walked over. She smiled, introduced herself, and gently led her toward a circle of women who welcomed her with warmth. A small gesture, but it would ripple for years. Moments like that reminded Elena exactly why she had fought, why she had endured, why she had never given up. Teddy squealed in delight, chasing falling leaves as they tumbled in golden spirals around him. Elena's throat tightened, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She thought of Blake, for just a moment, wondered if, wherever he was, he ever lay awake at night, realizing what he had thrown away. But the thought passed, because her life, their life, was no longer shadowed by his mistakes. There was too much ahead to hold on to what was behind. A future waited for her, one bright with purpose, grounded in truth, radiant with healing. A life not built on wealth but on love. Love she gave without fear. Love she received without question. Love that had saved her. And love that, now, would carry her forward. Elena looked down at Teddy and whispered, "We made it, baby boy. We really did." In that still, golden moment, autumn leaves rustling around them, children's laughter echoing from the playground, she felt it deep in her bones, the shift. Her story had changed. From heartbreak to healing. From a rain-drenched sidewalk to sunlit grass beneath her son's tiny feet. Elena Carter, once a cast-off, terrified pregnant woman, had become the architect of her own future. And no one, not even the man who tried to destroy her, could ever take that away. Not after everything she'd endured. Not after everything she had rebuilt, with raw hands, a bruised heart, and an unbreakable will. Elena's journey reminds us that even in the darkest hours, resilience and love can pull us toward the light. She started as a wife who believed in forever and was blindsided by betrayal. But through perseverance and the unexpected inheritance of a legacy larger than she'd ever imagined, she discovered her own power. She reshaped her future, not for praise, not for revenge, but for the little boy whose life began where hers nearly ended. The woman she became, The mother, the leader, the voice for others, was a beacon. A living reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers in the quiet, keep going. Because sometimes the strongest stories don't start in success. They start in being shattered and rising anyway. Dear friend, life has a way of testing us. Quietly, cruelly, and often when we least expect it. You may find yourself standing in the rain, holding something fragile yet sacred, and like Elena, wondering how much more you can take. But as the Stoics teach us, we cannot control what happens to us, only how we respond. Elena's strength wasn't born from ease. It was born from heartbreak, shaped in solitude, and lit by the decision not to give up. Let her story be a reminder. Rock bottom isn't the end. It's the place where your foundation is poured. You are stronger than you think, and one day, you'll look back, just like Elena, and whisper to yourself, I made it. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own power, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach the ones who need them most. Someone out there is waiting to hear this. Maybe someone like Elena, maybe someone like you. And always remember, heartbreak is not the end, it's the beginning of something greater. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more real-life romantic dramas where hope always finds a way.